The following lecture is from my Udemy course, Complete 3D Animation Masterclass, Create Animated Shorts. If you like my teaching style and are interested in taking your skills from intermediate or beginner to advanced 3D artist, consider enrolling in my course. Link in the bio. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with Maya today. So we're going to kick off by opening it up and taking a look at around so you know what to expect. Now, in terms of opening it up, there's a couple different ways we can do this. One of the obvious ways is to find the Maya desktop icon, which should have appeared when you installed. In my case, it's the only thing on my screen. And what you can do is you can just double click on that to launch it. Now, this isn't always the best way to open up Maya or any software for that matter. When you use the double click approach, it needs to kind of register your input. Sometimes you could accidentally open it twice, maybe multiple times if you triple click on accident. So usually the double click approach isn't really the best way. A safer way is actually the right click method. If you click on a file and right click with your mouse, it will pull up the open menu. And this way you can make sure you just execute it one time. Now, the other way that I like to do it is actually through the search menu. This is usually how I go about doing it. It's just coming down here, using the search, searching for the software you're going to need and launching it that way. Once you launch it, it is going to take a bit to open. I've already opened it up. So let me go ahead and drag it onto the screen here. You're going to see something that looks a bit like this. So this is a rather new installment to Maya. I think it was added in around 2020. So it's been in here a while now, but for those of us who have been around since the dark ages, it's kind of new. Now, what this is going to have over here is a bunch of recent files that you can access. Some that have been deleted, you'll see have little notifications. So basically, it's a history of files that you can access. What we care about is just kind of opening it up. You could either click New, or you could just click the Go to Maya button. So let's go ahead and just click the Go to Maya button here to get into Maya and to look around. So this is going to be what Maya's user interface looks like, and this should be the default user interface. You may or may not have this little guy over here, depending on the layout. We can always reset it. So as with most software packages, if you come up here to Windows Workspace, you can go ahead and reset. So I'll go ahead and reset. And this is what it should look like. Now that we're inside of here, what I want to do is just go through some of the menus with you so you know what they are, what they do, and the terminology. So one of the first things to talk about is going to be the menu sets. It seems a little bit weird to talk about this right off the bat, but it's a very important one. So you'll see this area I just highlighted with my pen. It says rigging, and this is a menu set for the rigging tools. Why does this matter to us? Well, the menus are located right above here. So this entire stretch across here is the menus, all right? And when you change the menu set, it's going to change what those menus show. Now, this is going to be divided into different menu subsections. So you have what's known as the common menus. That's going to be File, Edit, Create, Select, Modify, Display, and Windows. So this first chunk here that I'm putting in blue, this stretch is going to be common. What that means is this is going to be in all the menu sets. So it doesn't matter if we're on rigging, animation, modeling, this should show up. So that's going to be the common section. And these are primarily for managing your scenes and managing your files. So things like saving, dealing with things like selections, that's going to be what goes on there. Specialized menu sets. So on this particular set, it's from skeleton down to control here, I believe. So this section here would be considered specialized that I'm putting in the magenta color. Now, the reason this is significant is this is the section that changes. And what I want you to understand is later on, when we start working with some of the more complex tools like modeling and rendering, you need to make sure you're on the correct menu set. Otherwise, your tools aren't going to look like mine. So this is the reason why I'm going over the user interface and really pushing the point here. You might be like, wait, I don't see the mesh menu. And if you look right now, if you could read those on your screen, you'll notice there is no mesh menu. And that's because it lives under the modeling menu set. So how do we change that? Well, you'll notice that rigging has a little drop-down arrow next to it here. And if I switch this over to modeling, you'll notice that we get a lot more menus. And if I go ahead and put back on my overlay, you'll see now that that specialization box, it doesn't contain all the new things, all the way out to cache. These are all the menus for modeling. So you'll see that the modeling has about twice as many menus as rigging did. And this is why it's important to understand if we're working on modeling, you're going to need to be in the modeling menu set. If we're working on rigging, you're going to need to be in the rigging menu set. So just be aware of that. Now, the last little tail end here, I'm going to highlight in black. These are going to be a mix of things. It's going to be your cache, which is going to be the media disk cache. There's a lot of different things you can cache out in here. If you're not familiar with cache or cache, it's basically taking computer data and storing it as files so that you can access later. It makes things load faster. Then you have your help menu. That's going to be a useful one, and we'll take a look at that in a moment. And you also have Arnold. So Arnold's going to be your renderer. Now, Arnold is the default renderer in here, and we'll talk more about other renderers later, but let's say you had RenderMan or V-Ray, they would have a menu set loaded here as well. So this section contains the cache, help, but it contains any external plugins, external tools that have menus. So those are going to be the categories. The blue is the common section. Always with every menu set, you're going to have access to that. The magenta color there is going to be your specialized menu sets that are going to change when you change your menu set. And then lastly, at the tail end there, you have sort of your static external menu sets that also contain your help menu. Now, beneath the menus, we have something called the status line. So if you ever hear me say go up to your status line, what I'm talking about is this area across here. The status line is an interesting section because basically what it's discussing is different ways you manage your scene. So a lot of the selection spaces are here. There's various things like snaps located along here. And we also have some tools for our rendering and lighting, as well as our login at the very end there. So that's what you're going to see on the status line, and we'll be coming into that later. I guess technically the user account menu is it's its own entity. It's located along the status line, but hey, it is its own menu technically. Now, beneath this, we're going to gain access to something called the shelf. So beneath the status line, this long thing here is going to be called our shelf. Now, the shelf is a graphic user interface version of menus. So if you have issues reading, maybe you're dyslexic, you might find it a lot easier to work from a shelf rather than the menus. What's cool is once we go into the menus, the icons in the menus and the icons on the shelf correlate. So you'll notice it's kind of mysterious what these tools are here. They don't have names, but if you go into your menus, you can find what they correlate to. Now, other advantages to the shelf, it just lets us get there faster. You don't have to go into the menus to grab it. And these essentially contain commonly used tools. Another really cool thing is you can kind of dual wield your tools by having a shelf set to one aspect of 3D and your menu set to another. So up there we have modeling set, but let's say we wanted to do modeling and rigging for some unknown reason. We could have those set. So down here we have our rigging, up here we have our modeling. You can also create custom shelves, but I'm not going to get into that. I don't particularly feel it's good for beginners to start with custom shelves. It's best to kind of just get into the user interface and use it. I've seen a lot of embarrassing situations where, a industry veteran goes to demonstrate on a computer that's not their home computer. They don't have any of their shelves and they don't even know how to use the software. It's really embarrassing. So I encourage you to learn it out of the package. That way you don't become reliant on your own setup. And then once you're comfortable with it, feel free to start building out your own. Let's go ahead and start working our way down here and talk about some of the other important things that we are going to have moving down into the scene itself. So the scene view here, this area, is called our view panel. And you might notice I have a little section right here open. You can ignore this. This is actually a special display. And just to show you how this works, since I am currently working at a game studio, I have to deal with poly count a lot. And that's what this menu lets me track. The display menu here lets me turn that off under heads up display, and you'll see the term poly count. So there's all sorts of things we can turn on and off here as we need. Let me turn off poly count so mine looks a bit more like yours. But this is going to be the view panel. Now, I often refer to this as the viewport because when I was going through my undergraduate degree, that was how it was introduced to me rather than the view panel. So if you hear me say view panel or viewport, I'm talking about this area here. Now, this area is also significant because it is your work area. All right, this is going to be our work area where we work inside of 3D. And we can actually change this, all right? So there's several different ways we can view this, and that's because the way we're viewing the work area from is actually from a camera. So a camera is what's letting us see this area. But what's cool about Maya is there's a whole bunch of cameras in the scene. So you can almost think of us as like a security guard when we're inside of Maya. We're actually viewing everything through a camera, and we can actually view it through different cameras. Let's explore that since I've already jumped the gun and we've got ourselves to this location. Over here, there's different layouts you can access. There's going to be two that we work between. This first one here, that is the default. It's already turned on, so if I click this, it won't do anything. It is our perspective view. And what the perspective view is a single camera that is in perspective mode. Now, if you're not familiar with the idea of perspective, perspective means that foreshortening occurs. So if we had something really close up to us, it's going to appear large, but then as it recedes away, it's going to get smaller. So that's going to be what we see in something like the perspective mode. And you could think of it as true 3D, true three-dimensional. Now, a really useful menu that we're going to use a lot when we get to modeling is going to be the split layout mode here. And this is the quad split layout. If we press the button here, we can access this. So what we have here is we essentially gain access to several cameras. In here, we're going to have our perspective camera. Over here, we're going to have orthographic cameras. Now, what orthographic means is that there is no foreshortening. So if we have perspective, what it's going to look like if we view it and it recedes is something like that. Let's say it was like a long building. But if it's orthographic, everything would maintain its proportion. So it would look more like that, where it would actually continue back. And we'll explore that later. We can also switch over here to a split layout, which just gives us two side by side. It's going to give us one orthographic, one perspective. For now, let's go ahead and stick in the perspective view, but that's going to be where we access this. Just to show you though, another aspect of the view panel is this top section here. This top section is attached to the view panel, and it is how we view the scene, or perhaps not how, but what we see when we view the scene. And each of these is unique to its own view panel. So what's going on in one may not necessarily go on in another. For the sake of demonstration, let's go ahead and go to the poly modeling shelf here and add an object to the scene. I'm going to click on that shelf, which will change my tools here. And let's go ahead and add in an object that might look different from different angles. We'll go ahead and grab this thing here called a torus. So if you go ahead and click on the torus there, it's going to go ahead and place it into our world. And what you will see is that we see it in each camera. So here we're seeing that perspective camera, and then here we're seeing it from the top. This is the front, and this is the side. So that's the idea behind orthographics. Now, let's say we modified this in some way using the view panel. For example, right now we're in something called shaded mode, which you can see here. But if we click one of the neighboring categories, in particular this mode here, we can move into something called wireframe mode. And that will remove the shading on the object. Now, in addition to that, if I click off of here, you'll see this a little bit better, where this is being viewed differently than these other panels. Now, I don't want to get into navigating the scene yet and moving. We're going to save that for another section, but I wanted to show you that that is going to be what this is going to do. It's going to change how we view things in the scene, and it's going to be a per panel option. So what we have set to one panel isn't necessarily going to be going on in another. Now, why is that? It actually largely has to do with rendering and processing power. When we start dealing with things like textures and lighting, we can also toggle those on and off through this menu. And textures and lighting take a lot more RAM, which can cause the computer to perform slowly if it's using a heavy amount. So let's say you're working in this split view. If you have your lights and textures on in every one of these views, you might cause the program to crash. Whereas having it turned off in all the other views and just the one you're working in can allow it to operate just fine. So that's one of the reasons those are divided. All right. So that's going to be the view panel. Next to this is going to be our toolbox. Kind of a funny name for this. So that is what this is called here, the toolbox, what I've highlighted there in yellow. The toolbox is going to contain our selection tools and our move tools. as well as a quick command to the last tool used. So that's the toolbox, and we'll explore that more in depth, but that's the term for that one. Next to the toolbox is a really useful tool here called the outliner. And you may not see this in your scene. There are some things that apparently I had turned on. It must have carried over some preferences. But if you don't see this, you can access it through this menu here. So that final menu is going to be the outliner. And if I go ahead and click on that, you'll see it disappears. Click on it, it comes back. What the outliner is an itemized list of everything in the scene. So what we currently have is a perspective camera, a top camera, a front camera, and a side. You'll see those are grayed out. That means they're hidden, so we don't see them. We don't want to see them, right? Because they're what we switch between. And then you'll see the torus. That's the object we made. And any other objects, if we were to add them, would be there. So for the sake of demonstration, we can click these various objects along here. Let's go ahead and add ourselves a sphere, add ourselves a cube. We'll see they add in here all on top of each other. And this lets us see them very easily. We can also select them by just clicking here to select the object. And we can see which one is active. Underneath that, you have a default light set, default object set. That just deals with scene management. It's nothing we need to concern ourselves with, but we can actually add other sets of our own later on to that and custom selection sets. So kind of neat, kind of useful. Now, let's go ahead and kind of work our way to the other side, which is going to be these menus over here. These menus are going to be a combination of different layouts. So one of the first things to talk about is going to be how we can change these up, which is going to be the sidebar icons. The sidebar icons are located up here, and they will toggle whatever menu you see on your sidebar. So right now, the menu we have open is called the channel box. And the channel box is going to be an extremely important editor for us when it comes to things like animation and to scene construction. The reason why is because it tracks the coordinates of our object in space. So that's what you're seeing here with the translate, rotate, scale. We'll explore that later. So this thing that looks like a stack of papers, that is going to be our channel box icon. Now, if we go ahead and click on the one next to that, it's going to pull up our tool settings. Notice this one didn't replace the menu, all right? So this is actually one we can have in addition to the other one here. And this is going to pull up the tool settings of any tool that we have active. So it's actually very useful. I generally don't use it though. I go to the manual options of the tool, or I'll show you a trick later where you can double click the main tools we're going to be changing, but we can go ahead and close that out. Next to that, we're going to have the attribute editor. Now you'll notice this has a lot more menus, like a lot more menus. The attribute editor is a deep dive into whatever we have selected. So to understand how Maya is constructed, Maya utilizes nodes. If you're not familiar with nodes, nodes are essentially tiny bits of code that link together like a spider web. So for example, you'll have one aspect here, it'll link to another aspect here, and to another aspect, and sometimes they can even interlink. And once all those nodes are connected, it creates something that we see inside of Maya. Now, this only shows up if we have something selected. So if I click off of here, so I don't have an object selected, you'll see that it is empty. But if I click onto something like the torus, sphere, or cube, we'll be seeing the attributes for that particular object. So this is all the various nodes that build this object, and we actually can come in here and we can edit and change these. Now, it's very intimidating at first, but the reality is a vast majority of these nodes you really don't need to bother with, but it's good to know that this is where they live if you do want to make some sort of change. And when you get into more advanced things like scripting and look development, you can do some really cool stuff inside of here. Now, let's get to a menu that we'll pretty much avoid here. This is called the human IK. This one is set up for creating human IKs. Looks like it didn't swap that menu out. Sometimes it swaps it, sometimes it doesn't. We're not going to touch this. This deals mostly with motion capture setup, so we can ignore that. And then finally, the last one's the modeling toolkit. And we'll probably take a look at this in the modeling section. This is a nice little menu. Maya didn't used to have this, and they added it in, I think, about 2014. So a very useful tool. We'll be exploring that later on. Maya has a lot of redundancy built in. Redundancy means something that repeats and probably doesn't have to. So in addition to these changing the sidebar icons, you can also change them here, whatever your preferences are. You might notice I come up here a lot, and that's because this is the older method. It's been in Maya longer. These side panels here haven't been in here quite as long, but you'll notice that you can click these side panels to switch between the channel, attribute, and modeling toolkit. And if you ever forget the names, they're written right there, which is nice. Underneath the channel box is going to be the layer editor. So just be aware that the layer editor is going to be tied into the channel box. It's not in the other menus. And that's going to be really useful for scene management. And when you get into more advanced animation techniques, you can also utilize that to create animation layers, which gives you a little bit finer control over your scene and the ability to create better variations faster. Down here, you're going to see this giant measuring tool, and this is going to be the timeline. We're not going to get to this for a while, but this is going to deal with animation. So that's going to be where we do our animation largely. Now, underneath this, you're going to have something called the range slider. So that box there is going to be our range slider. And it's going to control the amount of frames we see. Over here, you'll see the playback options. This is going to be for playing animations. Obviously, we don't have an animation, so we can't really play anything. Beneath that, you're going to see some animation settings. So down here is going to deal with some animation settings. This little button here is going to pull up something called the script editor. And if you go ahead and click that, you'll see the script editor pops up. This shows all the code running inside of Maya, and it's actually where we can do coding of our own. So if we want to create our own scripts that have special tools or anything like that, we can do that here. So this little corner down here with a question mark, this is called the help line. And what it does is when you hover over something, it gives you a description of it down there. So if I hover over a tool like this up here, you'll see I'm on this sphere shape. At the bottom there, it says polygon sphere, create a polygon sphere on the grid. And as I hover across these, you'll see for each of these tools, it describes what it does. And if we get into a tool that actually does a function like the bevel, you'll see the bevel says bevel components, create a bevel along the selected edges or faces. It gives us little hints on what to use. Now, the main thing I use it for is if I don't recognize icons, this is a great way to be like, oh, I have no idea what this tool is. Oh, that's the extrusion icon. So that's the main area I use it, but it can be very useful for beginners. Now, another useful thing to know is the help menu. And with the Maya help menu, you have a few different options like the quick tour. If you go ahead and do the quick tour, it will basically take you through what I just went through with you. You can go to the YouTube Learning channel now. So you could go there and you could see what they have on their channel. Other things you can access are going to be the documentation, which is the Maya help. And with any software, generally speaking, if you press F1, it will pull that up. And if we go ahead and click on this, you'll see this is going to be the user guide for Maya. Now, there's a lot of great information in here. And if you're the type of person who likes to read on your lunch break or something like that, I encourage you guys to just pull this up. You can find this online as well. You don't need Maya to access it. You can find all sorts of stuff in here. So for example, let's type in modeling. If we go ahead and look for modeling here, you'll see that it has all sorts of different modeling tips. We could just click on modeling here. You can see topics in the section. How can I count polygons? How can I get the name? All that stuff. And then you can just start clicking through this, and finding all the stuff you need. It's a little bit hard to navigate, but sometimes it's one of the best ways to kind of explore. And if you just go through the side here, you'll see that it's probably a little bit easier to navigate. It has some terminology, some graphs, which is really nice. All right. So that is going to be the Maya user interface in a nutshell. All right, so now that we're going to start working in Maya, I'm going to turn on some special tools to help you see what I'm doing. I've turned on the mouse pointer, so you'll be able to see where I am clicking. In addition to that, I'm going to turn on a little hotkey screen and place it on here so you can see the hotkeys I'm using. But before that, let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to be doing in this section. We're going to look at how we can navigate inside of Maya and we can move in 3D space. Now, the first thing we're going to need is some sort of an object to move around. So if you already have an object in your scene, feel free to use what you have. If you don't, go ahead and navigate over here to the poly modeling menu and grab yourself a cube by clicking on that icon, which will place a cube in the center of your screen. This will give us something we can move around and we can see our position relative to this object. Remember, when we're navigating in Maya, we are not moving 3D space. Okay, we're not moving the world, we're moving around the world. And essentially what we are is a camera. So you can think of our head as a camera, And then attached to that is our little body. And what we're doing is we're walking around the world here. All right. So that's essentially what we're doing. We're walking camera. If you just click around inside of Maya, you're going to notice it doesn't do anything. You're not able to move around or anything like that. You can select an object. When it's green, it's selected. If you weren't aware of that by now. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So movement is going to rely around hotkeys. So to help us out with that, I'm going to go ahead and utilize a tool here that will show the hotkey we are using. I'm going to go ahead and just activate it and place it on our screen so you can see what this looks like. All right, so I'm going to place it right here. This bar here is going to show you what hotkey I'm pressing. And you'll see if I click here, L button is going to be the left mouse button. Right click, that's going to be the R button. You'll also notice that's indicated in color. So orange is going to be my left click. Blue is going to be my right click. And now if I press down keys on my keyboard, you should see that as well. Now, let's discuss hand placement. Left and right is going to play a role here in terms of what button we click, but also where we place our hands on the keyboard. So when working inside of Maya, it's best to utilize your left hand to control and operate the keys and your right hand for the mouse, if you are right-handed. If you are left-handed, you can switch that if it's what you're comfortable to. Now, in terms of placement, your key pressing hand, which is your left hand, is going to be over on the left hand of your keyboard. Your fingers are going to be hovering around the WASD area and your thumb around the Alt and spacebar. If you're familiar with PC gaming, it's the same setup for that. So WASD is what you move with inside of games. It's not what we move with inside of here, but we will be using the keys in that region for a certain function. What's important, though, is that your thumb is around the Alt and spacebar. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold down the Alt key, and you'll see I have the left Alt key held down, so I'm still holding it down. And I'm going to pair that by now clicking with the left button of my mouse. And you'll see while I hold down Alt and while I hold down the mouse button, we are performing a function here called a tumble. So a tumble is where we're essentially moving around the object. All right, so we're moving from the center point of that object around it. So use your imagination here. Basically, we're walking in a circle around this when we're doing the tumble. Okay, so that is going to be holding down Alt plus holding down left click. If I lift left click, you'll see it stops tumbling. And if I click it again, you'll see it starts again. All right, now, the next operation we can do is we can go ahead and do a dolly. A dolly, in layman's terms, is a zoom. That's where we move closer or further away from the object. The term tumble and dolly are both for cameras. We use film terminology when working inside of 3D, but a lot of people like to call it zooming. For those of you familiar with cameras, you'll already know the issue with that. But that is what we stick to, is generally camera terminology. So if we go ahead and hold down Alt and this time right click, you can see that we can zoom in and out. All right. Now, the way I'm moving my mouse here is I'm moving left to right. All right. Left to right is what I'm doing to move this. You can also move forward and backwards to do this, but it kind of is challenging depending on your real estate for your desktop. So usually left to right is the better option to do this zoom. Okay. And just click down the button the whole time. When you don't want to do it anymore, you can lift it up. What's nice is while we're doing this, we can just keep the Alt button held down and we can toggle between these two mouse clicks to make our movements happen. So if I Alt and left button, I can tumble. If I Alt and right button, I can zoom. And this whole time, I just have my fingers on Alt. So they're not lifting at all. Now, the last thing to talk about is something called a pan. A pan allows us to move side to side. And as you might guess, this is going to require the mouse, but it's going to require our third button. So back in the beginning of this course in the material section, I mentioned you should have a 3-button mouse. If you don't have one, you're not going to be able to do this. You might have to find some alternative, but this is why. If you hold down Alt and you press the middle mouse button, you can perform a pan. So a pan is essentially moving across the space, side to side, forward, backwards type thing. So tumble is going to deal with rotations. Pan is going to deal with translations, with moving. And dolly is going to be getting closer or further. Okay, so what I want you to do is I want you to take some time practicing this until you get comfortable before you move on to the next section. This seems easy, but it's actually a lot more challenging than you would think, and it stops a lot of beginners in their tracks. Okay, so that is going to be how we navigate, holding down that Alt button, and just keep your thumb on that Alt button the whole time you want to move. And as you click, you can use the corresponding buttons that go with it. So once again, left click is going to do our tumble, right click is going to do our dolly or zoom, and then middle mouse button is going to do our pan, which will let us move side to side here. All right, so give that a go, master that to the best of your ability,